station where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.
And yeah, it's going to be interesting for you to lead through them if you want to remind yourselves of the past of crop circle research. So, right, we need to get on to the speaker. I think I've said everything I need to say for now. Many years ago, I'm not sure if you remember it or not, but this gentleman here, Alan Foster, when we used to be in the Scout Centre, came and spoke for us a long time ago. Alan, in the years since, has become a very prominent UFO researcher. That is a very important topic now in a world where many people hope, at least, we're nudging towards some level of disclosure, but certainly something's happening. When you start to get congressional hearings about what we must now call UAP, you know that there's a shift. And Alan's very much part of this. He's involved with the pilots reporting UFOs in the UK group. This is very important because we need people like that to testify now and go on the record. And there's people like Alan who are at the forefront that are doing this kind of work. So we're going to get a real insight to that and beyond, and find out why consciousness and psychic forces are also somehow caught up with UFOs, as indeed we discovered long ago when we did our work, which you can read about in the PDFs. So listen, really pleasure to have him here. So big hand please for Alan Foster.
Thanks very much. I was going to hold this, but I think probably easier if I just... Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Great, lovely. So just to give you an idea of my background, besides that introduction, my name's Alan Foster. I'm a writer, researcher and lecturer on UFOs, crop formations, environmental and spiritual issues. I've been studying this subject for over 50 years now, since I had a UFO encounter in April 1973, and that stimulated me to start looking at these subjects. I've worked in various industries, including 19 years in the airline industry, some of that working as a manager of an airline operation that provided the commercial transport for the US military, and that was in the UK and the Mediterranean. And I worked in airline operations as well at international airports, including Gatwick, down the road. Now, the title of the talk today is UFOs, Disclosure and the Consciousness Connection. So, as Andy said, the first part of it, I want to just highlight some incredible cases that I've had where I've spoken to pilots directly about their UFO interactions, and they really are amazing cases, and to touch on the pilots reporting UAP. In the central area, I want to cover the disclosure processes that are happening at the moment, the sort of the chronology of it. Now, some of you, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with it, but for those that are not, it will give you an idea of some of the important events that have been happening. And then thirdly, I want to go into the consciousness connection, which is an area I feel better about, to be honest with you. But there's some amazing things that are happening. So I'll highlight that as we go towards the end. The talk is probably about an hour and 15 minutes, which we've got the time for. I might just sort of nip through some of the slides where there's quite a lot of writing, just because I want to have time for questions at the end, and I think it's important if we have that. So thank you. So early last year, Gary Heseltine, who is the editor of UFO Truth magazine, he set up, along with myself, Alan Foster, with my airline background and also UFO research, with Dave Hodrian, who's the gentleman who runs the Birmingham UFO group. I think he's spoken here as well. And Chris Gaffney, who is a light aircraft pilot and a researcher in Ireland. So I live in Wales and the other two in England, so it sort of covers all the bases really. But the point of this was, to set this up, is again to have to recognise the fact that there is clear air safety implications with UFO interactions with aircraft. I've spoken to many pilots about this, and so many of them, and you know this, the history of decades where pilots, particularly in the States where it was more sort of prevalent, because I actually worked for US Airlines, they knew that they couldn't speak about this, about having a UFO sighting, even if it was of great concern to them. with air proximity to the objects. And this is ridiculous. And so they felt like there could be either a $10,000 fine or several years imprisonment, or definitely could lose their jobs. And this is the environment we live in because of the the scepticism and debunking regarding the UFO reality. So air safety issues for pilots are really important. There's no way should they not be allowed to discuss the things that they've seen. And so some of the things we do are, I'm not, I won't go into too much of it, but we're a team of researchers looking into this. But in addition to pilots, we also encourage other aircrew and aviation employees, including radar operators and air traffic controllers, to come forward. We collaborate with pilots, aviation organisations and government agencies to gather, investigate and analyse data. As I say, it's thankfully this is becoming more open now. I think pilots are starting to feel that they can speak out about this without retribution. Now, this is a picture of myself from 2009. I was the turnaround manager of that particular flight. But I show you that as a way of highlighting the fact that it actually gave me, as a long-time researcher into UFOs, I had the opportunity to actually speak to pilots, in the flight deck, about UFOs and whether they'd had an experience or not, and the flight crew as well. So it was amazing. Some of the cases that I had from them directly was truly profound. And so I want to sort of highlight a couple for you. But also, I've given sort of hundreds of lectures to community groups and professional organisations over the years. And it amazes me, even like the Royal Naval Association, the Royal Air Force Association, Royal British Legion, etc. But also WIs and probers. And it amazes me how in nearly every group you speak to, there will be somebody who has an experience that they're then willing to talk about, perhaps for the first time in their life. So I've had a lot of cases given to me directly by witnesses through those sort of groups. But the first one I want to highlight is this. I spoke to a retired squadron leader from the RAF who in 1965-66, he was based at RAF Akrotiri in southern Cyprus, which is obviously quite active at the moment for various reasons. Now, in 1966, in July, he was a duty pilot that day, and way above Cyprus, there was this sort of cone-shaped object moving very, very slowly, high in a very clear sky. It was like 40 degrees, a beautiful day. Even though it looked a bit like a weather balloon, they realised it wasn't. So he was scrambled, and he was flying a Lightning, which at the time in the mid-60s was one of the most powerful jets on Earth. He took off, turned round, started to climb towards this object. He thought he'd get to it quite quickly. He never seemed to get any closer as he was climbing. So he was like 5,000 feet, 10,000, 15, 20, 25,000 feet. So he asked for permission to go supersonic, which they gave him. So he opened up full afterburner and blasted this Lightning right up. He said he went past 40,000 feet, which was its official ceiling at that time, and he went straight to about 60,000 feet, which is probably dangerous, to be honest. And at that point, the air was so thin that one of the engines flamed out, and he actually went into a stall. But at that point, as he was stalling, he looked up. The object was about a third closer to him, still way above him. But it was this silver cone-shaped object, no windows. He said there was no way was that made on Earth. The aircraft then fell back towards Earth, about 30,000 feet. He was able to fire up the second engine. He then actually flew to the North African coast because he wanted to see, he had the sun behind him when he was originally flying to it, and he wanted to see if there was the shadow side, so it was a cone-shaped object, which it was. When he landed, he went through the usual debriefing with the wing commander afterwards, and as ever, as we know with this subject, he was told he wasn't allowed to talk about this again. But they estimated that the object was at 168,000 feet above Earth and was half a mile across. So this was, basically like a city in the sky. And again, when you talk to people like this, You see the emotion, sometimes often tears coming out of their eyes. You know that these people are not making this up. Now, another case, this was from speaking to a Royal British Legion group, and the gentleman after the talk spoke out about his own experience, which is wonderful. And I met him later on to sort of talk about the finer details. But this happened on the 25th of July 1967, and he was flying that very aircraft, Kilo Alpha, under British Eagle Airways. It was a flight from New York JFK to Heathrow, and so they'd taken off. He had about 120 passengers on board. The aircraft was virtually full. He said when they were at about south of Greenland area, sort of halfway on the journey, it was just starting to get light in the eastern horizon. He said suddenly on the left they could see an object like this. This is the classic, most beautiful UFO, the Carlos Diaz plasma craft. I could speak all day about this case. To me, this is one of the most incredible cases of contactee with human-type ETs from Mexico from 1981. This photograph, and over several decades, he's taken film footage and photographs of this. There's about 12,000 witnesses in Tepoztlán in Mexico that have seen this. So it's an incredible case. It's believed to be highly advanced, organic, sentient thinking technology. So way beyond just nuts and bolts. But anyway, that's a sort of side issue. The object, I showed this in the lecture, and it was that stimulated him then to talk about it. He said because it was very similar to the object they saw. So basically, the object was following close to their aircraft. So they were on radio frequency to air traffic control, which was in Shannon at that time, about this. And suddenly, he said, 2 F-100 Super Sabres turned up, American aircraft. He said, he wasn't sure where they'd come from. They must have come from Greenland, but he didn't know of any places, certainly the southern Greenland. I mean, there's Thule up in the northwest, but they seemed to arrive really quickly. But they were also speaking on his radio frequency, so he could hear what they were saying. As they approached, this object suddenly tilted about 30 degrees and then just went straight up into space. They tried to follow, of course, no chance. Then they peeled away and went off his radio frequency. Now, what is interesting is, about 3 hours later after this, they landed at Heathrow. They went to their normal, this is 1967. They went to their office, they did their normal debrief after the flight. And suddenly 4 men in suits turned up. One of them they felt was MOD, British. The other 3 were Americans, guys in suits. And they spoke to them individually, asked them about the case, and then at the end of it, as ever, said to them, you're not allowed to talk about this, which probably the first time he spoke about it openly was at that talk, which is pretty amazing. But I'll highlight this as well, because that's, that case is not only the UFO, but it's the fact that within 3 hours of this happening, you've got American personnel turning up airside at Heathrow. So they've got authority to go on board, airside. It shows how long that they've been sort of monitoring this and controlling this. Really important. And then thirdly is this guy. This is Captain Ray Bowyer. Some of you probably know this case. A really lovely gentleman. Now, I spoke with him, gave a lecture with him at a conference, and because I was speaking there because of my airline background, but also UFO research. A really, really nice, honest guy. Now, his case is this was back in the 23rd of April 2007. He was flying from Southampton to Albany in the Channel Islands when he saw these 2 massive, about 1 mile across, disc-shaped objects off Guernsey. He was flying with Aurigny Air Services in a Trilander, that aircraft, and there's no doorway between the pilot and the passengers, so he could hear them all talking. They were looking out the window as well. There was also a pilot of a Blue Islands flight that was going from flying to Jersey, and Jersey Air Traffic Control also tracked these objects. They're massive. So he ended up speaking about it in the local news. This is the Jersey Evening Post, but there's one in Guernsey as well. I actually saw this on the mainstream news, like News at 10, ITV, I think it was. So, you know, it's a real shock, very rare that a pilot is allowed to speak out openly. But also, what's interesting from my own research is at that time I was working in airline operations at Bristol Airport, and we used to dispatch the Aurigny flights. So again, this gave me an opportunity to speak to some of the pilots and crew about Captain Ray Bowyer and say, you know, what is he, you know, what do you think about this case? And they're going, spot on. I said, if he says he saw this stuff, then you can take it. You know, we all know he's a really honest and trustworthy guy. So I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so this is Command Sergeant Major Bob Dean, who was the intelligence analyst at the SHAPE headquarters, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe in Brussels. He was there, you know, in 1964 when he was there. He had an above top secret clearance, and he said he came across a document called the assessment document. This document was the assessment of the extraterrestrial situation on Earth for those with a need to know. And again, you all know that, you know, Prime Ministers and Presidents don't necessarily have a need to know. Now, he said that in that document, this is 1964, they had evidence for at least a dozen different ET races interacting with the human race. Again, in a way, a bit like humans, they sort of fall into three categories. There were those that they felt are negative, perhaps have negative intentions towards us or are using us. There are others that are here in a more observational capacity, particularly at the moment as we're going through these incredible technological and environmental changes. Thirdly, there were those that are here in a more benevolent capacity, that probably want us to evolve, certainly in a more spiritual direction, or definitely to care for the environment and the planet. So, in view of that, I show this montage as a way of sort of slightly highlighting that. The fact that it is a very complex subject, the more you look into it. You've got testimony about reptilians as either physical beings or possibly negative interdimensional entities. You've got the greys, which are either tall, the taller beings, probably 4 foot, down to the 3 foot type beings. In many cases, it's believed that the smaller ones may be automatons, either ET or possibly even now we're hearing, you know, made by humans, these automaton beings. So it's again, it's so complicated. Up at the top left, I show the Nordics, you know, the human types. Again, some incredible cases. I talk about the Mexican one where he was speaking to humans, but they would speak, you know, in the voice box in Mexican. You've got the Billy Meyer case from Switzerland, again, where they would speak to him literally in Swiss, and you know, other cases as well where they're actually, you know, Georgia Dancer himself, of course, speaking in American. So, you know, again, these have voice boxes, not just telepathy. It's incredible. In the middle, I show a picture that I took. This was in 2008 in Madeira, up in the mountains, and we've been discussing, because the topography was very similar to the topography of Tepoztlán in Mexico. So we were talking about how wonderful it would be to see a plasma craft, you know, rather than a sort of metallic type, you know, something that like possibly even a life form. And the next picture that I took was this. This is zoomed in slightly. So it's like it was a response to a real heartfelt request to see something like this. And I show that because that then highlights, you know, what you were hearing about now about CE5, you know, and sort of communications and telepathic communication with these craft. The top right, I show a picture of an angel, not because an angel is an extraterrestrial. As far as I'm concerned, angels are divine messengers from God, spiritual beings that are here to help us at pivotal moments within our life, on our soul journey, again, only relevant moments, and of course they're there to help people at the point that they pass over at the end of life. I show that though because it is important, you know, this is the more the disclosure happens, the more people wake up to this. I think this is going to be an area where possibly divine interactions, and I mean divine, I don't mean ET ones, are going to be dismissed as though they were all ET. I think it's so important we understand that there is a spiritual reality as well as the advanced extraterrestrial reality too. And then down here, I show the sort of the military side of this, which you could say is quite nefarious. They talk about the MILABs, the military abductions that may have been going on as well, where they're working in conjunction with some of these beings. Again, you can imagine mainstream society when they start to know about this, it's going to get messy. But anyway, I show that because it is a very complicated subject. Now, again, as we sort of progressing, one of the most common interactions that have happened over the years with UFOs has been with the nuclear side of things, which you can understand in a way. This is the book written by Captain Robert Salas, who was the launch control officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana in March 1967. A lot happened in 67. And this is where a UFO hovered over the base and 10 of his nukes were deactivated one by one. And he said, this is impossible, this can't happen because we have backup systems and backup generators. And they literally switched off. And it also happened at another site as well, another 10. So there were 20 nukes that were deactivated. So you can imagine behind the scenes, the military would have seen this as a real defence significance. And again, it comes back to what we feel personally, how we feel about this, whether we think that this is a military threat, or is it beings that are trying to say, you've got to stop this nuclear program that's sort of destroying your world, and definitely doesn't need to go out into the cosmos. So again, it's up to people what they decide about that. But then we had the disclosures, and these were a real foundation, real groundwork for what's happening now with the congressional hearings. The first one on the 9th of May 2001, that was the one that was set up by Dr. Stephen Greer. Brilliant. There's about over 20 people from high levels of military and government and pilots that gave their own personal experiences of UFOs, ETs, and even back engineering technology. This was filmed in front of the world's media at the National Press Club in Washington, DC, including the BBC, so there's no excuse. Then there was one on the 12th of November 2007. Again, these are all in the National Press Club. It's just down the road from the White House. And, amazing group of people here. But interestingly enough, that's Captain Ray Bowyer, his encounter in April 2007. So he was invited to give a talk here as well about his experience, which I think is lovely. This is Commander Oscar Santamaria Huertas, Peruvian pilot, who in 1980 was scrambled to go and see this object that was hovering near their military base. He was a Top Gun pilot, and he actually fired. He was authorised to fire on this object. He fired 30mm cannon at this object, which was below him. He had tracer rounds. They were hitting the desert. They went across the UFO and then hit the desert beyond. He expected it to explode like a tank or a truck would, but that didn't happen. He then thought possibly the bullets would ricochet, but that didn't happen as well. They just literally disappeared, like the bullets vaporised, 30mm bullets. It took off. He flew off after this as well, and the next time he came to approach, he was about to fire, and this object ascended to a higher altitude. He flew up the second time, went to fire, and he went up to a higher altitude. The third time he flew towards it, he was up at about 60,000 feet. He went to fire again, and this object then flew off. Now, it's important to note, because the system that he was using was mechanical. There was no electronics, so he wasn't sending out an electronic signal. So the feeling is with this, and this is back to 1980, is that the occupants of that object were recognising his intention, his thought, at the point that he fired this, before he fired the bullets. So, again, that's one of the earlier links of the telepathic aspect to this. That's General Parviz Jafari from 1976 in Iran. Tehran, a military flight again, where he was authorised to fire on an object. I think a smaller object was approaching this large illuminated object. He was about to fire missiles, which were electronic systems, and all of his electronics the weapons system, the communication system cut out. You can still fly the aircraft. So that's interesting. And then here, the last one I'll mention, that's the former governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, who was one of the witnesses to the mile-across triangular boomerang-shaped object that flew silently over Phoenix, Arizona, back in March 1997. They reckon there's about 10,000 witnesses that actually saw that object. So, again, very important disclosure this was. 2010, another one about nukes, and then this one here on the right, which was end of April, early May, 5 days, about 40 people, military and government, pilots, researchers, giving their testimony in front of a former congressman and a senator. This is sort of warming up for the disclosure, which is what they were pushing for, these congressional hearings. That's the picture there. The person that's speaking at the moment, that is Captain Robert Salas, and giving his testimony about the fact that the nukes were shut down at Malmstrom. So now we move towards the sort of stuff that we've been hearing in this chronology with the 2017, of course, when the New York Times published the information about the Tic Tac flights and showed the images of these objects and the testimony of the pilots and stuff, and it really sort of, at last, the media was starting to talk about it, certainly in America. And the US Navy then officially acknowledged that UFOs are real and violate American airspace. And this is based on the encounter in 2004 off California. This is the image that most people see. It's called the gimbal. This is actually not from that incident, the Tic Tac. This was an object from 2015 off the east coast of America. But this is a really weird object. The gimbal is what a compass on a ship pivots on, and this is doing the same sort of thing. And so that really, that's the footage that most people see, but it was a different incident. But the one that most people know of happened on the 14th of November 2004 off the west coast of California. There was a big US military exercise, including the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier and the USS Princeton, which had the cutting edge radar technology, still sort of secret even now. They were tracking objects over several days, not just the one Tic Tac object. And they were these UAP, which was at the time, as you know, unidentified aerial phenomena, and then it became unidentified anomalous phenomena, and even now it's like unidentified all-domain phenomena, because these objects are seen to come in from space, come into the atmosphere, and then go into the sea and back out again. So these were pulling 700 up to 1350 G-forces. Maximum for a human is about 8 or 9 with all the kit. Instantaneous acceleration, travelling from point A to B over many miles in a second, with speeds from 13,000 to 100,000 miles per hour, with no sonic boom. One object seen by the FA-18 pilot Commander David Fravor flew in a blink to their combat assembly point, which was predetermined and secret to the air wing. Now that's important because they, prior to any exercise or military operation, they have a 3D point in space-time where they agree to either meet initially or to rendezvous afterwards, and it's very secret to them. So for this object to go straight to that point and hover is, what that says is interesting. They would stop in mid-air instantaneously, and go from very high altitude back to the sea, down to the sea and back up again. Senior Chief Clement Day, who was on the Princeton, he was a senior radar specialist and radar trainer. They were tracking multiple objects over several days. One object went from 80,000 feet down to the sea and instantly stopped. It's basically, and that was in under 1 second. That is the equivalent speed of at least 52,000 miles an hour. So for it to suddenly stop, if there was somebody in it, like us, we'd be extraordinarily jammed. And then further evidence dictates that UAP do not seem to be affected by the forces of gravity or air or water pressure on the structure of the object, and therefore are able to manoeuvre in abnormal ways. Now that's important as well. I mean, I know of 3 cases of pilots that I'm aware of where they've seen this, where there's like a UFO, they see a UFO and it flies towards them, and they think it's going to hit the front of the aircraft, and it flies just over the top, and they sort of duck. And then the natural instinct for a pilot is to expect that, you know, the turbulence as they go through the area where it's just flown, but there's nothing. For a pilot, it's really quite strange. And as I say, that has been spoken of several times. But I think, you know, whether that's because of the anti-grav technology, the sort of bubble of anti-grav around them, and I suspect that's also why they're able to fly in the sea as well. You know, they don't actually affect it, the pressure on the craft in the same way within the air as well. Now that on the left is Senior Chief Kevin Day, who was the senior radar specialist on Princeton. And this is a screen grab from an interview by Tim Ventura. This is around about 2022. I show that because I really like Kevin Day. He's, you know, when he speaks with real passion about this experience, you know, nearly a tear in the eye. He also recognises how to talk about this subject can end up ruining a career, you know what I mean, as ever. So, yeah, he seems like a heartfelt gentleman. And then just briefly here, in the chronology, as this sort of was expanding, August 2020, the US Department of Defense established the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, UAPTF, to improve its understanding of and gain insight into the nature and origins of UAPs. And then about a year later, in June 21, that preliminary assessment UAP document was released. And it says on page 3, most of the UAP reported from November 2004, the Tic Tac object, through to March 21, probably do represent physical objects, given that a majority of UAP were registered across multiple sensors, to include radar, infrared, electro-optical, weapon seekers and visual observation as well, and that they can manoeuvre abruptly and at considerable speed. And notice that was only 2004 again. Most of the things that are being spoken of now, it's only from that event onwards. There's no reference to anything in the past, you know, the things that we know, you know, like Roswell and other cases. And then the former head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, which Lou Elizondo, again, I'm sure most of you have heard of, he referred to the UAP as having erratic flight behaviour, unlike anything seen before, defying all logic and our current understanding of aerodynamics, and behaving in ways that aren't physically normal as far as our taught laws of physics are. So with all of this going on, eventually, at last, you know, no disclosures at the National Press Club that I showed you a minute ago, you know, at last it led to this historic open congressional hearing that happened on the 17th of May 22. You know, and when they say open congressional hearing, they mean, you know, that it's filmed, so live, so people can actually see what's being said. As ever, if you watch it, you know, it's still fairly lame. It's still, you know, minimum what they're talking about, showing fuzzy little blob pictures, nothing profound. You know, and they're talking as though, oh, this is a shock, you know, didn't know this stuff happened. And as I say, you know, Roswell alone, there's like 600 witnesses, first, second and third hand witnesses that have spoken about Roswell, you know, that it's real, that it was a real easy event. But anyway, it was important, it was a really important event. And then a year later, in May 2023, NASA at last had an open meeting, you know, filmed. It's like 4 hours long. What I find interesting, if you look at this picture, is you look at the faces on the people there. It sort of says it all, really, doesn't it? They definitely don't like talking about UFOs or UAP. And in fact, there was one gentleman, I did watch it, and there was one gentleman in there said something like, you know, that, but, you know, the astronauts don't really know about UFOs. We don't have any briefings on UFOs. You know, which is a complete lie, as we all know. I mean, one of the classic examples is, you know, many of them, from Gordon Cooper, Buzz Aldrin, Edgar Mitchell, Story Musgrave, Scott Carpenter, have all spoken openly in the mainstream media about their own experience of UFOs or their awareness of other people, particularly the military, that have seen them as well. So, you know, there's no excuse. If they're speaking about it openly in the media, NASA certainly know about that. And this is one quote, of course, from Gordon Cooper from the 14th of January 1997, when he said, "I know other astronauts share my feelings, and we know the government is sitting on hard evidence of UFOs." And of course, by hard evidence, you know, he's not talking about pictures with fuzzy blobs. You know, he's referring to literal technology. But he also, he was one of those who had his own sighting. He was based at Edwards Air Force Base in California back in 1957, and a UFO actually landed on the runway. This is only a few years after the sightings, the interactions from President Eisenhower, who had interactions with human types with UFOs at Muroc Air Base, which is the same one. He said that they filmed this object. He saw the footage. It was good. An aircraft came in from Washington, picked up the canisters of film, flew it back to Washington, and then he was asked, "Well, what happened to the footage? Where did it go?" He said, "How would I know? You know, this is so compartmentalised. Once it goes back to Washington, you'll never find it again." So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so then chronologically. So then this led to, on the 11th of June 2023, at last, whistleblower David Grush, interviewed by investigative journalist Ross Coulthard, brilliant investigative journalist. I'm sure many of you have seen him interviewing people. He's absolutely incredible. His knowledge, his understanding, and you know, his eloquence. So he interviews former US intelligence officer David Grush, who acknowledges that craft and bodies of non-human intelligence have been recovered. Again, people like us, we're sort of familiar with that's probably a reality anyway. But you know, it's shocking when this is coming out on News Nation, you know, and mainstream media. And of course, that then led just a month or so later, you know, end of July, just over a month and a half later, to another congressional hearing, a much more relevant one. These are people who've had all three of those, you know, that are aware of this subject at a deep level. David Grush in the middle, former US military intelligence official. On the right is former US Navy FA-18 pilot, Commander David Fravor, and he was the gentleman who saw the Tic Tac, you know, performing those incredible manoeuvres off California. And on the left is Lieutenant Ryan Graves, who was the former US Navy FA-18 pilot as well. He was involved in the incidents off the East Coast. And he said, you know, this is like the 2015 stuff that was happening over there. He said that they were having to brief pilots at last on UAP because they were seeing them nearly every day, and a lot of these objects would come very close to the aircraft. There's one he spoke of where a sphere, translucent sphere that had like a grey cube inside it with the points of the cube touching the sphere, that flew within about 14 feet of the canopy of his aircraft, one of the jets, and there were two flying closely together that flew between the two aircraft, and this is the stuff going on. So they used to brief them on, pilots were briefed on UAP because of what was happening out there. But he set up Americans for Safe Aerospace, which is again a bit like us in the UK, you know, very much concerned with pilot testimonies, commercial and military. And there's a clear air safety issue here, and always has been. A pilot there's no way should a pilot not be allowed to report something that's possibly affected his aircraft, particularly if he's carrying passengers. It's really important. And again here, former US intelligence official David Grush says under oath that the US government is in possession of UFOs and non-human bodies. And again, this is profound stuff. At last, it's being spoken of. So then, because of this, Senator Chuck Schumer, the Senate leader, he set up what was called the Schumer Amendment, or the UAP Disclosure Act, to really try and get this information out there, and to also give protection for whistleblowers. It was gutted by a small number of powerful Republicans. This is the front of UFO Truth magazine for December 23. And just to highlight, this is one of Gary Heseltine's articles, but to highlight the fact that at the end of 23, the Schumer Amendment, Chuck Schumer, introduced an amendment aimed at unveiling long-standing covert programs that have endeavoured to reverse engineer craft of unknown or non-human origin. The amendment was designed for inclusion in the National Defence Authorisation Act for fiscal year 24. Behind the scenes, powerful forces were at work to water down this amendment by the intelligence and defence contractors who are suspected of being involved in a decades-long campaign to deny knowledge of UFO crash retrievals and reverse engineering programs. And of the original 64 pages of legislation, it was pared down to just 19, so about a third. And almost all of the significant provisions were removed from the final bill. Gone was the Independent Review Board, which wanted to see the disclosure of significant UAP information and materials. Gone was the use of eminent domain, which would have enabled the US federal government to take back any materials or biological evidence of unknown or non-human origin. Gone are improved whistleblower and witness protections. And that's really important. And that's why a lot of these people have, there's hundreds of them that want to testify, but that they're very nervous, that they could end up going to jail if they speak about their, over their secrecy oaths. If they can be protected, then a lot more are going to speak out. And that was removed. So, and again here, it's gone on subpoena powers and amnesty provision for defence contractors and others in possession of UAP-related materials, so that they can be forced to speak about it if necessary. So only 2 of the original 24 references to non-human intelligence made it into this amendment. Now, after that, this was one of these things. This is why it's such a time of change, because there are people who are saying, right, we've had enough, and I'm going to start speaking. And this is Rear Admiral retired Tim Gallaudet, and he said, "I'm totally convinced that we're experiencing a non-human higher intelligence. I'm completely convinced because I know the people who were in the government programs, the legacy programs, that oversaw both the crash retrieval and just the analysis of UAP data. And I'm very confident in these people, former intelligence, former DOD, and we're working as a team behind the scenes to advance disclosure, a controlled disclosure, mind you, as was put forth in the Schumer Amendment." And again, he said, "We're being visited by non-human intelligence with technology we really don't understand, and with intentions we don't understand either." And this then led to, so forgive me for rambling on, I do get a bit annoyed with talking about, alphabet agencies and all this stuff. It's a bit tedious. We've got to speak in ordinary language, but it is what it is. There's then discussions of the Office of Global Access, which was one of the organisations that were in charge of the retrieval of crashed or downed UFOs. And this has been going on for a long, long time. Like I said, like 1967, when the Americans are turning up, at Heathrow Airport, they've been very much aware of this. But anyway, he says at least 9 non-human craft have been recovered by the US government. Some wrecked from a crash and 2 completely intact. The CIA has a system in place that can discern UFOs while they're still cloaked. And that's important. They've now got the technology to see these objects, whether they're cloaked or not. And special military units are sent to salvage the wreckage. Again, they now have the technology to shoot these objects down, and this is a real problem. 3 sources briefed on those alleged top-secret operations told this was Daily Mail that the Office of Global Access, a wing of the Central Intelligence Agency's Science and Technology Directorate, has played a central role since 2003 in orchestrating the collection of what could be alien spacecraft. But if you think about Roswell was 1947, you know, they already had retrieved craft and bodies, and you know, earlier than that as well, we're led to believe. So then, the Pentagon ended up writing a report about this to dismiss this, to say this was via AARO, which is the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And this Pentagon report says there is no evidence of a UFO back engineering program, which now, you know, here we are. That was in March, so that was a year ago, and look what's been happening now with the disclosures that are happening, with the Jake Barber disclosures. However, Ross Coulthard was talking directly to multiple people in the Legacy Retrieval Program, the reverse engineering program that's being secretly operated within the US government and private aerospace. The Pentagon is trying to stop this issue being discussed any further. And he already had a list of people that pulled the strings on today's that report by the Pentagon. So he's already got the list of those that were responsible for saying that there's no such thing as back engineering programs. And this is where, you know, the whistleblowers were starting to get sort of angry. They said that they're now leaking information, and this is as this progressed, where they really wanted to speak out about this. One of the sort of most vocal people, again, for those that have looked into this, is the Republican Tim Burchett, who's the member of the House Oversight Committee. This was in May 24. He filed the UAP Transparency Act, and he says, let them vote against it, because if they vote against it, what have they got to hide? They keep saying they don't exist. Give us the information then. Tell us what you're spending tens of millions of dollars on. One object flew just 14 feet away from the canopy of a military jet. That was the one that I said about the sphere. A former admiral's telling me something's under the water, travelling at 200 miles an hour, as big as a football pitch. So again, you know, I think this is referring to the fact that these things don't actually affect the water. It's really strange. And again, there's the belief that there are undersea bases, alien bases as well. We are told they have recovery units. What the heck are they recovering? And as he says, it won't upset my religious beliefs. I still believe Jesus died on the cross for me. This universe is a lot bigger than we give it credit for. So, this is Dr. Stephen Greer. I know, many of you, I'm sure, are aware of him. He was, he's been pushing for disclosure since the 90s, definitely. There's briefed people at the Pentagon, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, even at the Vatican. In 2000, he had a meeting with Monsignor Corrado Babucci to discuss the subject. He's done a huge amount of work, and he, was responsible for that first disclosure that I said in 2001, May 2001, at the National Press Club. But more recently, he's set up the DPIA, which is the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. This was from June last year, which is a comprehensive database devoted to UFO-ET research, a vast repository filled with unique and largely undiscovered content, set to welcome public access and contributions. And actually, it became live around about June last year. A massive site. One of the things he highlights is fairly recent documentary called The Lost Century, which if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. It's basically saying that for 100 years, humanity has been lied to about technology that would free us and liberate us, so that we can have free energy technology. We don't need to be reliant on, the oil oligarchs. Every house, every car could be running on free energy. And this is not just from Tesla. We're talking Tesla onwards. But people who make little discoveries in sheds in the bottom of their garden, the perpetual motion machines, things like this, we could be completely liberated. And yet, this is the group that's controlling all of this. They don't want the UFO stuff coming out because of the potential to free us. So he was then, this was last year, he was talking about catastrophic disclosure. And he's got over 700, about 760 high-level government and corporate whistleblowers willing to testify regarding the UFO issue. And the DPIA will become one of the largest online sites containing some of the most important UAP information. Recent retrievals, underground bases, and man-made UAPs, which he's talking a lot about. They were at that time, June last year, they were organising a 24-hour legal protection for whistleblowers wanting to talk. People such as those working at black ops sites, dealing with UAP, underground bases with retrieved ET material, and even a corporation constructing advanced energy and propulsion systems, which they've been doing for decades. Dr. Greer says some black ops tech have the ability to see cloaked craft to then target them. So this is again is a real issue. It's not just talking about ETs or whatever. That they can see them cloaked, and that they're using like electromagnetic pulse weaponry to actually take down these craft, which is horrendous. And he says a catastrophic disclosure is about to happen, which will be all at once. And the Senate bill was pushed out in December 23, and the amnesty or safe harbour clause was taken out. That was the final straw. So, nearly through this. This is, again, much more recent now, another congressional hearing, Committee on Oversight and Accountability. This was on 13 November 24. Again, you probably know these people. That's the retired Admiral Tim Gallaudet. That's Lou Elizondo, former UAPTF. This is Schellenberger, a researcher, and Mr. Gold here was former NASA as well. They were speaking about their awareness. Again, none of those guys are actual experiencers, as it were. They're not whistleblowers speaking about their own knowledge of this subject, but it was still reasonably interesting, 2.5 hours. But basically, I've just put, to me, in all of that, there's only these few questions were the only ones that I felt were relevant, so forgive me, I'll just read you these again. So these were questions by the congressional members to the witnesses. One was by Miss Luna to Lou Elizondo. Regarding these aircraft being piloted by non-human biologics, are they being piloted by some mind-body connection? Which again, this is important as we start to lead towards this understanding. Lou Elizondo responded, they are being intelligently controlled because they can anticipate our manoeuvres and can stalk our ships. Miss Luna, David Grush previously said these may be interdimensional beings. Again, important. He replied to that, but he says, regarding instantaneous acceleration, the human body can withstand 9 Gs for a short period of time only. F-16s have the capability of performing up to 17, 18 Gs before structural failure. The vehicles we're talking about can perform in excess of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Gs. They do these instantaneous high-speed turns, stopping or accelerating. And then she said, are they living craft? Some people say they're good and bad, whatever these things are, which again is a really important question. I showed you that orangey yellow plasma craft earlier on. That they are living craft, and some there may be life forms as well that are often only seen in the infrared or in the ultraviolet. They're not actually in the visual spectrum. So there's a lot more going on around us that we're not aware of. Ms. Bobert to Mike Schellenberger, are there any reports of undersea UAP that defy our level of capabilities? I think they all do. And then Ms. Mace to Tim Gallaudet, how would you actually define non-human biologics? And he replied, it is not a stretch when you look at the diversity of life on this earth, that there are more diverse, higher intelligences throughout the universe, and that's probably what's visiting us. And then, this is right up to date. This was in UFO Truth magazine, February 24th, so just gone. And that's that lady was the lady who asked the first sort of 3 questions, Anna Paulina Luna, Congresswoman, announcing, this is interesting, announcing the creation of the task force on the declassification of federal secrets. And with that, that's not just UAP, UFOs, but it's also about the relevance of the shooting of JFK, also the origins of COVID, and even 9/11, which is something that really is allowed to be spoken of. So, it is as though this is sort of being prized apart, and the truth is starting to come out. So, we're at a really important time of change. So now what I want to do, thankfully, is now move towards the consciousness side of this, so which I feel much happier talking about. So last year, in July 24, this is Danny Sheehan. He's the guy with the hair. He was legal counsel for many of the whistleblowers, going back to the disclosures at the National Press Club and the current whistleblowers. So he's an important figure in all this. But he said, this was July, the Senate Intelligence Committee has now secured the testimony under oath of over 40 people who were directly involved in the UFO, UAP, reverse engineering and crash retrieval program. They have cleared David Bush to testify in public in Congress that we were in possession of more than one extraterrestrial non-human spacecraft, and the biological evidence establishing that the occupants of the craft were non-human. That info has been cleared by the US Defense Department Office of Pre-Publication Review. Now this is the important bit. 2 of the craft they recovered were fully functional. That doesn't mean they know how to fly them. Those craft they appear to be navigated telepathically. And in fact, for long-term researchers of this subject, it was always sort of said, from the 60s, 70s, 80s onwards, that there was this belief that with the back engineering program, or the trying to work out how these objects fly, that the US military would often want psychics to work with them, because they were much more likely to be able to operate the craft than non-psychics. So it was initially thought that they had fingerprint keyboards for operating the craft, which nowadays, back then that seemed really, wow, that's amazing. But of course now with iPhones, it's no big deal for us, funny enough. But then it was perhaps with headsets, and then it was realised, which is why they wanted psychics, is that there was this link between the craft itself and the pilot, the occupant, on a telepathic level, so that they would think something and the craft would do what they wanted, which is why they can perform these incredible manoeuvres, as well as the anti-grav sort of shielding. So that was really interesting that was actually mentioned. And then, of course, that's where this really starts to take off. Now, with the whistleblowers that are really speaking out about their involvement not only on the retrieval of downed UFO, either crashed or intact, but the fact that they actually have those that are operating with psionics, PSI, like psi, who are able to telepathically, often in a meditative state, are telepathically able to bring in these objects. And then they can either, they land, they crash, or they're targeted and shot down, which again is obviously wrong. But that's the capability that these people have in these black ops things that are going on. While the rest of the world is being told there's no such thing as UFOs, and these guys are actually bringing stuff in, through thought. So the main whistleblower, the recent one from January this year, is Jake Barber. He interviewed by Ross Coulthard on News Nation. And he was former US Air Force Special Operations, Department of Defense, and contractor for the intelligence community and private sector. He's a whistleblower acknowledging military and corporate operation of crash retrieval advanced man-made experimental technology. This is the point. The human-made technology, which they've been working on for decades, is so advanced that now you can't really tell the difference between them and UFOs, so they can definitely fool us. So when they were crashing, these are the teams that would go in, which is why they were then the ones that were called in to do retrievals on non-human craft, and downed exotic craft of non-human origin. He was aware of underground bases, having visited them, was on a special operations team, airlifting downed UFO, UAP using helicopters and lifting gear, and he had experienced a profound consciousness interaction with a non-human craft during one of those lifting operations. So again, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but this is the footage that came out. It's still sort of limited in a way, but this is a screen grab of this egg, basically, which they said was non-human. No propulsion. It had no thermal signature, which is really unusual. Because nowadays we look at wildlife shows, and when they do night vision, even the trees have got, they're giving heat, but this had no thermal signature. This egg, and they picked this up and retrieved this. But also he picked up what was an octagon-shaped disc, UFO. And he said as he approached in the helicopter at night in the high mountains, he started to become very emotional. And again, these guys are like serious special ops guys. He's flying a helicopter, he's suddenly having an overwhelming feeling of happiness and sadness. I felt like something connected with me, something had tuned into me and my soul, and was providing me with some sense of guidance on what to do and how profound what I was doing was. And it was so overwhelming that I began to cry. So he's actually flying this helicopter and crying. Whatever that force was, since that night, it has stayed with me. And as crazy as it sounds, it's what's guiding me now, and it's what is providing protection for me. So again, there's something really big going on here. He actually said in this interview, we provide a path to redemption. Jake believes that he and his team will be used by the government to do a peaceful, non-judgmental disclosure. So whether that happens or not. How UAP are being operated and where they come from, we should be able to answer those questions probably entirely in the next 12 months. So, how things have progressed. I spoke at Glastonbury last July, and what has happened since then is just unbelievable. So, another year from now. This is another one of those whistleblowers, Fred Baker, interviewed in January by what's called TAR. Former US Air Force Special Operations team, backing the credibility of Joe Barber. That's basically what he was doing here, saying this guy is not lying, I know about his credentials, he has his own experiences. He's now part of the Skywatcher team with Jake Barber, Dr. Gary Nolan, the psionic operatives, those that have this ability in a meditative state to interact with these objects and bring them in, which is a whole talk in itself, plus sensor data and operations teams. On the first one they did, Fred Baker witnessed an object coming in and out of the atmosphere several times, then a mothership, a massive triangle in the sky with lights on each point, silent in the clear sky, multiple football fields in size, and smaller orbs flying around it. So this is what the Skywatcher team, the psionic guys were communicating or sending out this message, and this massive triangular craft came in. Again, if it leads to, this is where it's slightly different from CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, where people are doing it in a heartfelt way. Again, Dr. Stephen Greer and others, Andy knows all about this. It's different, it's peaceful. So some of this, I have a problem with this when it relates to a military side to this. And this is why I'm getting a lot of respect for Stephen Greer, that he is sort of speaking out quite grim at the moment. He's doing these podcasts. This is number 6. Just last week he had number 7. Again, he's talking about catastrophic disclosure like he did last year, but actually he's really defining what that means now, in the sense that he's not saying catastrophic disclosure is about the release of UAP information around the world and that people are going to go running to the hills, because everyone is aware of the subject and are quite comfortable with it. It's about the controlling of the information so it is presented as a threat, possibly leading to a false flag event. And we used to talk about that decades ago, the belief that there would be this, that they would control it again, so it's a military operation rather than a peaceful thing. I.e. of humans against a negativity threat, created by using human-built ARVs alien reproduction vehicles to simulate an invasion, which you wouldn't know because they have such advanced technology. And again, as he says, this doesn't allow the opportunity to liberate our people in all strata of societies, remove poverty by withholding advanced free energy zero-point technologies, which we already have, or they already have. So this is why it's a really big subject. It's not just about UFOs and aliens. And in a way, this sort of military control was highlighted by Colonel Phil Corso, who he was on President Eisenhower's Security Council, so he would have been fully aware of Eisenhower having had meetings with ETs, human-type ETs, back in the 50s. He himself saw one of the bodies from the crash of the UFO at Roswell and met a living ET. And he, in the early 60s, from 61 to 63, he was he worked for the Army's Research and Development Department in the Foreign Technology Division at the Pentagon. And it was his job to seed some of the technology from the crashed UFO at Roswell into the mainstream industry through the government contracting programs. And as he said, you know, we were putting these into companies or corporations like IBM, Monsanto, General Electric. So it looked as though they had discovered, invented these things like silicon chip, fiber optics, night vision, Kevlar, the body armor, microcircuitry, lasers, etc., which supposedly all came out of or were helped with technology from Roswell, which is why our technology has gone through the roof. But again, perhaps like now, you know, I wonder if it's like some sort of Trojan horse event where this technology has been given us, and this is what people are thinking about the stuff that's happening now. You know, so that we have a sort of a change in the direction that we go in, good or bad. But just to highlight how, you know, there is this sort of military governmental control and the business, the big business of war. The B-2 bomber really sums this up. This is the B-2 stealth bomber developed by Northrop Grumman, and just one of these cost $2 billion, which is the equivalent of about £1.6 billion. So if you think the average salary in this country probably is about £25,000, something like that, it would take a person on £25,000 a year 64,000 years to earn enough money to buy just one of these planes. I keep on doing that sum. In fact, I did it before I came to the talk because I thought, no, it can't be. And it is. So, you know, that's just one aircraft. And, you know, I mean, it's a global operation and a global business is the business of military and war. You know, some people don't want that to change. But interestingly enough, this is a picture I took in '92, just after the first Gulf War, and of the stealth fighter, which was developed by Lockheed Martin. And again, there were rumours, you know, in those sort of days that there may be some sort of UFO technology in the stealth fighter. And of course, clearly they don't fly like a UFO, you know, they have normal flight characteristics. But it may have been alluding to the fact that there were, you know, advanced fibre optics and computer systems in there. Could be. But what I find fascinating, and again, some of you will have heard of this, again, and I'm moving into the consciousness stuff, is that Ben Rich, who headed the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, which developed the stealth aircraft, he gave a presentation to the Engineering and Alumni Association at the University of California in Los Angeles, of which Rich was an alumnus, on the 23rd of March 1993. And he said, "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it will take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." He also said, he concluded his presentation by announcing, "We now have the technology to take ET home." After the presentation, he said, regarding the possibility of us travelling to the stars, "It won't take someone's lifetime to do it. There is an error in the equations, and we know what it is, and we now have the capability to travel to the stars." So he was asked by a delegate, a man who was very aware of technology, Jan Harsman, And he said, Ben, what equations are you talking about? How does UFO propulsion work? And he said, let me ask you, how does extrasensory perception work? Jan replied without thinking, all points in time and space are connected. Rich shot back, that's how it works. Now this is really important. I think, again, like I said about in the early days, they were talking about psychics were needed to be able to fly these craft. They clearly became aware that the only way to go vast distances or to go superluminal beyond the speed of light was there had to be this mind connection between the pilot and the craft itself. It was not about, accelerators, gears, and ordinary technology. This is something beyond it. It was only when they found that they could do these advanced distances. I mean, I find it fascinating that, talking of the contactees, Billy Meyer with the Palladians that he was seeing in Switzerland in late 70s, 80s. They said that they were coming from the Palladians, which is 400 light years away, and yet they were able to get here. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's like in 7 hours, something like, might have been 7 minutes, but they could get 400 light years in 7 hours, let's say. So it's way beyond lumbering rockets, travelling well below the speed of light. This is something beyond it, but I think there has to be this psychic connection for us to liberate ourselves. And it's the key, which he clearly understood back in '93. And in fact, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who's spoken out openly about UFO reality as well, he said that when he was in space, he had a profound experience of feeling interconnected to everything he was observing from the window of his space capsule. The stars, the moon, our blue planet, and the vastness of the cosmos. He quickly realised that in order to explain such an extraordinary experience, and others like it, there would need to be a rapprochement, friendly relations, between the scientific and spiritual interpretations of reality. He saw a need to reconcile his training as an engineer and astrophysicist, left brain, with the wisdom of the ages, right brain, to transcend the limitations of what he saw as an outdated materialist worldview. A new framework would be needed, one that could help explain the unexplainable and spark transformation. He called this framework noetic sciences, and noetic is from the Greek, which means inner wisdom, direct knowing, intuition, or implicit understanding. And so he set up IONS, which is now one of the world's largest teams of multidisciplinary scientists conducting research on frontier topics in consciousness and its impact on our lives. And he said, we need to make the world safe for creativity and intuition, for it's creativity and intuition that will make the world safe for us. Again, right brain, creative people, spiritual people. That's where you make a transformation in the world. And it's really highlighted by Tesla when he said this: the day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence, which is a profound quote. Now, another thing, again, I'm sure some of you are aware of this, but if you're not, I highly recommend that you check this out. This is taking the world by storm. It's absolutely profound. This is set up by a documentary maker, filmmaker, Kai Dickens in the States, California, working with a neuroscientist, Dr. Diana Hennessy-Powell, where they have, well, I'll read this. This is a groundbreaking series which challenges everything we think we know about communication and the human mind. Working with neuroscientist Dr. Hennessy-Powell, the telepathy takes team witnessed mind-boggling telepathy tests through the eyes of those who speak without words with families from around the globe. The implications are huge for humanity and the planet. And this is, when they say people who speak without words, again, they're talking about autistic children. But when you listen to this, these are people who have no connection to each other, from Mexico, from England, from the States. And these children generally, they can read the minds of like their parents and other people, 100% correct. They do test after test after test, all sorts of tests, and they get it right every single time. It's unbelievable. But they're also, and this would probably be worrying to the authorities, a lot of them communicate with each other. They call it on the hill, that they actually communicate telepathically with other people around the world, other autistic people. So, from the States to Denmark or whatever. It really, honestly, when you hear it, tears in my eyes, it really is quite incredible. But it's at the same time we're starting to find out about the psionics and sort of the consciousness link with the craft. This is coming out, that there are many who have the ability, and I'm sure we all do, we all know what it's like to, think of somebody and the phone rings and it's there. It's a very basic example. Right. I'm sure you weren't expecting that as the next slide. But it's amazing. In South Africa, there's a guy called Lawrence Anthony who set up an orphanage for orphaned baby rhino elephants, where their parents had been killed to take the tusks or the horns. So really horrible. So he'd have all these the baby elephants and rhino. And over a period of time in this sanctuary, he had a real strong bond with one particular elephant called Nana. And as she grew up, their bond was really, really quite profound. Eventually, she was released into the wild along with other elephants when they'd grown up. And then on the 12th of March 2012, Lawrence Anthony died, passed over. And what was amazing is, the following day, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Nana came from the wild with other elephants and came up to the enclosure, stood by the fence, and just was staring at the house where he passed over, head down, as if in grief or respect and love for him. Unbelievable. Then of course they went back. The following year, the same day, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, she came back up again, stood at the fence, looking at the house, again obviously giving respect, and went away. And then the third year, it happened again. On the same day, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, at the same time, she came out of the wild, came up to the enclosure, and again, was just looking at the house as if to send respect. Quite incredible.
He actually died in Cape Town.
Was it?
And lived in Durban. So it was, that's a vast.
Right.
Past in Cape Town.
Okay, I thought it was in the house. Right.
No, it wasn't in the house. I lived in South Africa, you're quite right. He actually was doing a lecture for the elephants.
Right.
Away from the house. And his wife was from the house. And before she heard the news, the elephants were already lined up.
Yeah, the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, even further.
Yes.
I'll ask you about that after.
But you're right, it does happen on the anniversary.
The 3 days, the anniversary, to the time.
Yeah, every year.
I sort of, again, this is what we're talking consciousness, in relation to the other stuff, but it's showing that the animals, are already switched on, like these children with their telepathy tapes, and the fact that they, with the elephants particularly, what was it? How did they know? What was it? A telepathic thought? Was it their complete understanding? Did he, in spirit, go to see Nana because of the bonds? Like with a loved one, like we have where loved ones come back to people after they've passed over. It boggles the mind. But again, that's what I say. If we're talking about consciousness and higher awareness, we have to include all life on planet, not just us. So I'm nearly finished. For many years, for about 30 years, I've been lecturing on the crop circles, and amazing. But just for this talk, I just want to highlight this one. I normally talk about that one by Steve Alexander, this one, that appeared in Martin Cell Hill, in relation to crop-specific formations. They're the ones that actually, it's only the crop that is laid in the formation. And if there's anything else in there, like weeds, poppies, or say like a stalk, this is wheat, just like a stalk of barley from the year before, they all remain standing. So it's as though the technology to create these is so advanced that it can literally, whether it's the frequency, the sonic, the diatonic of the wheat that is laid. It's quite amazing. I've seen it myself, and I know others who have. And here again, it's sort of really highlighting that by being just in the field. Next to it is a grass field, you know what I mean? But I use this as an example of how I feel where we're at the moment. We're at this massive time of change. I mean, we've been speaking about it for decades, but it really feels like something really big is going on at the moment. And I sort of see like we're standing against that field there. And if you look left or right, there's like 8 billion people all crammed up here. Sort of feeling this. I would say there's so much sadness and killing and warfare. It's really horrendous, some of the things that are happening, and yet these revelations are happening as well. So I feel like it's a massive time. Whether we're up against the veil, this is the moment we've been waiting for, to be able to sort of step through this and ascend to high levels. But we are at a massive time, and it's really important, I think, that we look outside the mainstream at these sort of things. And just to highlight that, I think it's very important we realise that we're like spirits incarnate. And this brilliant picture by George Edgar Hicks, where you've got the density of the third dimensional plane that we're in, and these parents who really sadly have lost their child. But the truth is that the soul of the child has left the body and is now being welcomed up into heaven. In this case, by an angel, but it can be loved ones that have passed over previously, or beings of light. So it's more than just the physical. There's definitely so much more to it. I think that's important. We know that. So to sort of highlight that, this is a montage of pictures that I've taken around the world, but it sort of emphasises what an incredible planet we live on. So many beautiful people, and if you travel around, the people that you meet, it's everyone. Most people just want to get on with their life and be happy and kind. And it doesn't matter what culture, colour, religion or not people are. It is a beautiful planet, and we must remember, not to be divided by this elite that want us all fractured all the time. It's an important thing. So finally, I just want to finish with this slide to say that we are more than just the physical, that we affect the world around us even by our thoughts, that this time on earth is known about, and we have help and guidance as we go through these changes, and are not alone in these endeavours. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, you do have time for Q&A.
Yeah, okay. We're sort of nearly at the end of time, but please, if anyone's got any questions, please ask.
I kind of wonder how much Musk and Trump know about these things.
Yeah, I mean, Musk had an interview by Joe Rogan recently, and he was saying on that he has the highest level of clearance, and that he with SpaceX and everything, basically he knows all the technology. But he said there isn't any. We don't have any advanced technology beyond rockets and things like that. Whether we're just talking about human-made or DT, non-human. Which of course, then the debate is this is sorry if you can hear me. This is really worrying, and this is again some people feel that this is leading to them saying that if everything that we see, Stephen Greer was certainly talking about this, that if all the things that we see that are like UFOs could be man-made, they can do this fake alien invasion thing, and if he's saying that we don't have anything like that, they can really do this false flag thing and have their final big global war about all of us against it. It's just horrible. So he must know more than that, so he must have been very calculated in what he said.
Well, Musk answered saying that SpaceX was the most advanced technology that he knew about.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
So that poses the question, does he really know?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It's very primitive stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That he's using.
Yes.
Chemical rockets.
Yeah, exactly.
Been around since 1900s.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Big fire.
Yeah. I honestly find that hard to believe, but then again, we know this 100%. It's always been compartmentalised. It's always been need to know, you know, and because so many people, again, I'm Stephen Greer, you know, he's spoken to so many high levels, really high level generals and, you know, people in military intelligence, and they say, well, I must know, and they still don't know. They're not allowed to if they ask to find out about it. So it is difficult. I can't believe he is. He must know more than that. And as for Trump, I've got those.
I come from having a very close encounter in 1979, so I'm a total believer.
Right.
One thing that does challenge me though, if there are extraterrestrials that are trying to progress us as humanity, rather than like give the odd crop circle, etc., or the odd encounter like I had, which was just me, what I can't understand is why would they not say go to events, mass events like the Olympics, and just turn up right in the middle, it's being streamed to 2 million people around. Why would they not do that?
It's actually a really good question, and there's probably multiple ways of answering it. In a way, the only way I'm going to answer this one is from the experience of crop circles, is that for the people who are researching crop circles from the really early days, the one thing that, as we, because I was speaking to Marcus about it earlier, really remembering the passion we had, enthusiasm for it in the sort of the early mid-90s, you know, when the Julius and really profound formations were appearing. And what it did is, particularly because the vast majority were appearing in that triangular area, you know, Wiltshire, Hampshire, that people came from all over the world to see them because they knew they were going to appear every year. And, you know, there's that, again, that enthusiasm and passion, but it led people to look into, to meet people, to look into other areas like UFOs, like spiritual healing, dowsing, of course, and all those sort of things. And I think the feeling was, because people want it to be defined, but that is one of the things I always felt, is it was a way of letting people who have that heart, that spirit, that desire to know and understand, they could come and do that. And I think it may be possibly to do with this as well. It's not about telling the whole world through, you know, 2 billion people watching a football game. It's like it's, you know, the genuine ones. I'm not talking about negative or whatever. It's about, you know, whether you choose to look yourself or not, which again is why I think disclosure is about the people, you know, not about presidents and prime ministers, because they're the wrong people to be in charge of this. It's us, you know, the people. So, thanks for that.
Do you think we might be an experiment?
Sorry, we?
Do you think we might be an experiment?
We?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Because, we've got Robert Hastings, for example, you know, the UFOs, and he talks about he's having a platform here, and he's of the view that there's a hybridization program.
Yeah.
I was just listening to a few US senators speak, Marco Rubio, and he said he's been briefed. And officially that the abductions are very disturbing. There's nothing they can do about it, and there is a hybrid breeding program that's going on, and which would indicate that perhaps there hasn't been disclosure because it's too horrific. And perhaps it does look like, I'm of the view that guys like Graham Hancock, there's clearly been previous civilizations, and so maybe, you know, our days are numbered.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a very valid point. Clearly. I mean, you know, pyramids, Baalbek, Lebanon, all these places, truly profound.
They had advanced cutting tools, right?
The what?
They had advanced cutting tools.
Must have done. Yeah, I mean, I went to Baalbek, and it just blew me away. There's one of the stones there is 1,670 tons, perfectly cut, as big as this section of this hall. Absolutely unbelievable. Yeah, I think the civilizations have been here for a long time. You know, they're coming and going. You know, if it's true what the Palladians said, that they could get here in 7 minutes from 400 light years away, or 7 hours. You know, they've been coming and going. We are a profound world. Looking at that picture and in the montage, so many opportunities. I think opportunities for incarnation here to experience the earth plane in multiple forms when you forget who you are, you know, behind the veil. But the same for advanced life forms coming here. Some of them are using us, you know, in the abduction process. Definitely, yeah, I mean, the 50s, 60s, 70s, again, with the hybridisation programme, you know, with the listless children. And then they seem to define that. David Jacobs was saying that they've then produced what he calls hybrids, that now they look exactly like us, and they're walking among us, you know. So how many millions of those are around?
Might be some here tonight.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. So it is very complicated. And again, I think, you know, I do believe there is a negative element, honestly. And like they say, and observers and benevolent ones, I think certainly like that. That's why I love the Carlos Diaz encounters, if anyone's seen them, from Mexico, because they are really, the beings that he speaks with are very, very concerned about the planet. And they say, and again, talking of consciousness, when they were speaking to him and to children, when he was speaking Mexican to these children, he said, you've got to understand that everything is connected, from a blade of grass to fields, to oceans, to planets, solar systems, galaxies, and then multiple dimensions beyond. All things are connected. So, like, you know, like the old sort of Zen Buddhism, the butterfly wing in one place will affect something somewhere else, and it's that profound. So yeah, it's very complicated. But I think there are. It seems fairly sure there are many different races interacting with us, either using us or helping us. So. Yeah, we are at a massive time of change. Even within this last year, what's going on is we've all been wanting something like this to happen. Again, I don't want the military to control it, but it's a massive change. Thank you.
In answer to the gentleman in front of me, again, we end up believing what resonates with us.
Yeah.
So who really knows? But apparently we have this space program way above don't tell me presidents on that need to know. So the technology is there to wipe out the UFO that comes and exposes itself. We've got laser technology that's zapping them as we speak. So they can't just come and show themselves, they will be obliterated. So, you know, there is that as a sort of.
No, it's a valid point, because again, that was, you know, the fact that it's actually coming out, it was believed that they may be able to do that. Now those whistleblowers are actually saying that they can see clovercraft and they can target them with electromagnetic pulse weaponry, which knocks out their systems. Yeah, I can see that. But I think like that brilliant 1951 movie when the Earth stood still. The second one I didn't like, but the first one, you know, the black and white one, what a brilliant movie. You know, I mean, it's the same sort of sentiment that I don't think they want us out, you know, beyond possibly the solar system, Earth, you know. Certainly with the technology we've got, if we take in nuclear out there, it's not a good thing. So I feel like some sort of galactic federation will not want us out there if at the moment we're trying to work out what's going on. And that's why I think a lot of the things like the Tic Tac stuff and the egg and all those things are possibly a way of sending this stuff without somebody being inside, like they're equivalent of drones, you know what I mean? It's waking people up. So we need to wake up and be nice.
There's been a lot of misinformation over the last 5 years or so.
Yeah.
I mean, before as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's planned.
Yes.
Including flat Earth.
Yeah.
Do you think that's part of the whole sort of confusion?
Always.
Yeah.
There's always going to be disinformation. That goes without fact. When you're dealing with this level, you know, the guys who are involved in the retrievals are talking about, you know, how clever they are, the people that run this, you know. These are the people who meet in those walnut pound offices, you know, and discuss the fate of humanity, you know, from decades, centuries ago. So yeah, they're always going to, and because the media is the lapdog, we see that with, you know, what's happening, and I won't get into that stuff, but, you know, how the mainstream media feeds the lie when you know that something else is going on. So that definitely happens, yeah. And again, I think that's where it comes down to, you know, you've got to feel it in your heart what you think. You know, make your own decisions about this. This is, you know, I really feel like it is time for us to be liberated, you know. the good people, the good souls on this earth that have worked hard over probably many, many lives, and here and perhaps elsewhere as well. But yeah, flat Earth, great. And I love it when I see the shadow on the moon, you know, from the crescent through to the half and around. And even if you go, like I've seen this, like in the northern hemisphere, if you fill a sink with water, the water goes around the plug, I think anti-clockwise in the north. I've done it in the equator, and it just goes straight down, and then in, say, like Aussie, in the southern hemisphere, it rotates the other way. So stuff like that is showing that we're on a oh, and of course, if you're in the southern hemisphere, the moon's the other way around. You know.
Do you know what flat Earth said to me?
Right.
Because I was in Australia, I was screaming, I said to Derek, yeah, just go down the
Yeah.
next on the flat. And this flat Earth said, yeah, but they've done that to deceive you, to make you go around. And I just thought, really?
Yeah. God, the magnet underneath. No, I mean, there are some theories. That one is really well done. Brilliant. All right. I think we're nearly there. So
Before we thank Adam, which we will in a moment, I personally found that an incredible summary, very important summary of what's going on. Alan mentioned the Glastonbury Symposium there, where he spoke very well last year. This year's symposium will be back 25th and 27th of July. Booking should open next week, all being well. If you're on our emailing list, you will find out. And also when you look at paranormal, there's a whole chapter about everything we talked about tonight. So hopefully that will be something which will illuminate. One last very important thing, if anybody wants to come and chat, when we leave here, after we clear up, we go to the Block and Gasket Pub, which is just off the main high street. Go right, go there. Right. If you want to come and join us, we'll be in there. We'll be back here May 13th with Jeff Strange talking about the mysteries of Chartres Cathedral. But I really want to say a real thank you. That was fantastic. And if you don't come out, there's more in line. No talk, everyone will help you. So please, thank you very much.
The information where unknown forces strike the edge of ecology.